6 was hut 8, and you've already seen hut 4. And those were the most important ones in terms of code breaking. And they worked in pairs. So hut 8, which is behind you, worked with hut 4, and hut 6 worked with hut 3. And what went on in 8 and 6 was when all these intercepts came in, they were sent to the code breakers in those 2 huts. And what they had to do was find out something called a crib. A crib was, in Bletchley speak, was what they thought was actually in the message, based on where it had come from and what part of the theatre of war it had been sent from. And there's surprisingly a comparatively small vocabulary when it comes to talking about activities in wartime. And they would work out these cribs of what they thought was in the message, and they would work out what they thought each letter was, and they would make something called a menu. And the menu was a piece of paper, really with letters and lines, but it told the bomb operators what to do. These different sorts of wiring diagrams on the bomb. So that's where they were working. And you see, if you've seen the film Enigma, you'll see them inside, I think, hut 8. That was where Turing worked eventually. Very horrible. They were wooden corridors, wooden floors, very, miserable places to work in. It looks as if we might get a downpour. So what I'll do is I'll go into the next one, which is undercover, and talk a bit more about the huts from there. Just around the corner here. And as you can see, it's not a flimsy wooden hut at all. It's quite a solid built. It's got reinforced steel joists, and it has skylights which it didn't have in the war, and windows which it didn't have in the war. Although there's a tiny little window at the top for ventilation, and the bombs were wheeled in through the double door at the back. And there were 2 here originally. One was called Agnes, that was the first one. And although there were only 12 in 1941, we had over 330 by the time we finished in 1944. And there were 1,600 of us working the bombs in various outstations. Now the huts, if we go back to the huts for a minute, the menus came in here, and if these bombs worked out what was in it, in the actual message, that was sent back to the huts. If you were out of the park, you sent it on a little red scrambler telephone, and that went back. And then, if it came out in clear German, that was the end of what they had to do in hut 6 or in hut 8. It was then sent on to hut 3 or hut 4. They had to then decide what was important, what wasn't important, who it would go to, and then they had to paraphrase it, alter it in some way so that it said the same thing but in much different words, just in case it was intercepted. And then after that, it was re-encoded on our machines called Type X. And they did the same kind of thing as an Enigma machine, although they were much more wieldy and clumsy. You can see them actually in the museum. And when it was re-encoded, it was then sent to the commanders or whoever it was relevant to. And Churchill got a copy of virtually everything. This was his favourite operation. He called the people in Bletchley the geese that laid the golden eggs and didn't cackle. And then when the wrens came into it, he said the hens that laid the golden eggs and didn't cackle. And that was how that came about. And so then, when it was all sent out, that was the end of the job. If you brought the job up, everything would be rewired on this bomb machine. Sometimes, however, you couldn't use the information. There was information we couldn't use, like we knew exactly where they were going, Germans were going to land and invade Crete. That couldn't be used. We knew there was going to be a huge bombing raid on a major city. That turned out to be Coventry. But even if we had known, we couldn't have said anything. And we used to send reconnaissance planes over the Mediterranean and over to North Africa. And we used to bomb Rommel's troop ships, but we never bombed the food ships. The reason was we knew which was carrying, we were really interested in the petrol, and that's what we were bombing. And in fact, it was a major factor that Rommel was defeated, just didn't have petrol. But sometimes we had to use reconnaissance planes, which they thought were the reason why we knew that they were coming. And because they were far from stupid, we also had a secret agent in Italy, and we used to send him messages to say, thank you very much for all the information. Because there were games you played with each other. You had codes that each one knew the other was breaking. But of course the thing was, although we gave this secret agent a pay rise, he didn't exist. In fact, he was a man who never was. Otherwise he would have got the pay rise, I suppose. That's being cynical. So that was how the activities were there. When it stops raining, and if you go back, you'll see that Hut 6 and Hut 3 are adjacent to one another. And in order to speed things up and not to have to go out in the rain, taking deep bricks from Hut 6 into Hut 3, they had a little wooden tunnel built. And it was very technical. They had this wooden tunnel built, had a flap on either side to keep the draft out. And when Hut 6 had got some deep bricks they wanted to send into Hut 3, they banged on the flap with a broom handle. And they knew there was something coming. The messages came down on a tea tray at the end of a piece of string. It was just pulled through, bang on the broom handle, it went back again. But later on, of course, they had big blocks, B block, they were all breeze block buildings. And then they had a proper vacuum system, sort of a cylinder. You put the message in the cylinder and it was sucked up through a tube and it finished up somewhere else. It was called the suck and spit. And it went whoosh, and then came out miles away. And it was ejected forcibly. But to begin with, flexibility was everything. That's how it worked. Now, this was the famous bomb. There was a man called Gordon Welshman, and he worked together with Alan Turing. And Welshman more or less knew, he had the idea how breaking codes could be done by machine, because with these perforated sheets, it took a very long time, especially when the Germans added the 2 extra wheels. And Alan Turing worked out the actual way that this could mathematically be configured. So you'll see here lots of wheels, and they go from top to bottom. So there are 3, 1, 2, and 3, and they are virtually the same as the Enigma machine, 3 wheels. But to begin with, they said, well, this is very slow. If we need a machine, we'll wire 6 Enigmas together. And then by the end of it, they said, well, why not 36 machines together? And so that's what they did. There are 12 sets of wheels on each bank, which should make 36. And you could run different wheel orders. We used to call them not by wheel 1 to 5. That might be confusing. We used to use color codes. So that would be red, brown, and possibly another color. There would never be 2 colors the same. This is yellow, red, brown, and so on. So what you would do is you'd be given a menu which would tell you how to wire that up at the back. And then you would set the wheel orders on the front of the machine. Each bank was usually the same. And you would also set the top and the second rows would always be set to Z. The bottom ones would be different, usually from A onwards, A, B, C, D, and so on. They would all be set, and you'd have those three, and then you would switch on some switches at the side, and the thing would begin to go round. And like the real Enigma machine, every time the first wheel went round 26 times, the second one moved. In fact, on the Enigma, every time you press a key, the right-hand wheel moves. When it's gone round 26 times, the middle one moves once, and so on. When the middle one's gone round 26, the left-hand one moves once. Well, this did that, except it went round so quickly that it could work out all the wheel combinations in 15 minutes. And then when it had gone through those permutations, you took all the wheels off and tried another lot. Now, if the machine found that there was a connection between the wiring at the back and the menu on the top, it would stop. And this was quite a clever thing, because it would tell you there'd be a little lamp at the side, would tell you which set of wheels you were interested in. There'd also be a set of three here which don't match, and they would tell you the letters which were fixed onto the side of the wheel. And then there'd be something called a drop, and that was most important. There'd be one letter in the drop, and that would be the first of the pair of those steckers in the front when you drop the lid down, and there were those two little bits of wire joining up letters. That would tell you how to join up the first pair of letters, and then by going round the menu, the code breakers could find out maybe how 10 of those pairs of letters, then they could work fixed together, and then they could put it onto the Type X, or if they had an Enigma, they put it onto that, and then they could decrypt the message. It was very exciting. This bit of spaghetti junction was how you were supposed to join the letters together at the back of the machine. There are plugs that go into sockets, but there are 26 pins. These are just facsimiles, but there are 26 pins on the front of the plug, and at the other end there are another 26 pins, and they go into the 26 sockets, so that had to be absolutely spot on. No bending of the pins. Each socket represents a letter, and because there are 2 sockets for each letter, you can join the letters up. There's a top and a bottom. So you can go from the top of a letter into the bottom of another, and from the top of that you can make loops, and that's basically how the decoding was done, with loops. Loops of letters that all joined each other. Very technical, but they understood it, which the most. All we had to do was to understand how to put these wires in. There was a set for each bank of wheel orders, and how to follow this menu, and how to look very carefully at all the wheels, because there were over 100 little brushes, like little toothbrushes, those pointy brushes that you know, do teeth with, not the flat ones, the pointy ones. And they mustn't, one little wire must never touch another little wire, and you were given a pair of tweezers, and you had to hold these wheels up to the line and tweeze out all the wires. You could just about get it done in the 15 minutes. Put them all back on the racks, which are like those racks over on the left, and then change the wheel orders. Now, if you were lucky, you phoned the stop through to Bletchley, and if it brought the job up, they would say, job up, strip, which meant pull everything out and start again. And they were very reliable machines. They were only short tested once every 24 hours by RAF mechanics with a big trolley, and they used to test everything. And they went on day in and day out all through the war. Now, after the war, because Churchill didn't want anybody to know our operations, he ordered all these to be taken right down to the last little bit of wire. And so our job was to pull them all apart and unsolder everything, and all these little bits and pieces were sold off as army surplus. And I am told that if there was anything that might give the game away, it was thrown down open cast mine and concreted in. I haven't been able to verify that, but everything had to disappear. We did sell a lot of enigmas on the understanding that it was unbreakable, and this gave us a lot of very useful information about people that we didn't exactly feel comfortable with doing for quite a long while until somebody gave it away. So that was the reason. The other thing we did, every night we changed. So one night you'd do one of these machines. On the second night you could sit down and check the stops as they came through on a little checking machine. And that was quite exciting because that's where it all happened for us. Because as you went around pressing all the little switches and things on the checking machine, you would find at the beginning that A might equal Z. Later on, when you pressed Z, it might equal A. And that was very good news. That was called confirmation. If you had enough confirmations, you would phone it through on this Scrabbler telephone. These big machines were in big bays with 14, the one I worked in had 14 of these things clicking round all day and night. And each bay was called by an occupied country, Norway, Denmark, Holland, France. And every machine had the name of a town, so that if you were working in Norway and your bombe was called Stavanger, and you said to Bletchley on the phone, "This is Norway checker, I have a good stop for you on Stavanger," they would know exactly what was in the message you were on about, and that saved a lot of time. That was an exciting thing to do. This is the last stop but one, and if there's anything you'd like to ask me now about any of this, or is it all too horrible? We just, I think it stopped raining, in which case we can stop outside where F block used to be, and that's our last stop. Then send it again, and they broke the rules by setting the machine up in the same way as they had when they started before, so that we got the same information from different methods. Bletchley, he gave it to these men. One was called Max Newman, and he was a mathematician, and he worked out how it could be done, instead of in 6 weeks, much more quickly, and he then designed this machine together with a man called Tommy Flowers from the post office, and with just using the components that they use in an ordinary post office station, they built Colossus. And they never even saw the Lorentz machine until after the war. So it was an amazing feat. And one of the Colossus was in that beige building